connect with people on LinkedIn that can help you and mentor you and introduce you to people. A lot of it is just saying, I see the value of thought leadership. I want to be part of it.
Welcome everyone to the TechGuide Podcast, where we give actual advice to those that are wanting to break into tech or are looking for their next gig. We have Suzanne Rose on the podcast today, who is a program manager at Tata Consultancy Services. Super excited for her to come on today, talk about thought leadership and her experiences. So welcome, Suzanne. Super excited to have you here.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm really super excited to be here and talk about thought leadership and how you can break into it and why it matters for tech company.
I love it. It's going to be a great conversation. As someone that is interested in like marketing, thought leadership is right up that alley. But before we do that, I want to kind of give some background about some stuff that you've done, because you have been a script writer, an advertising copywriter, and an editor of a romance novels. I think that is super cool, but let us start. What is a favorite romance novel you've read?
Oh my gosh, I actually don't read them anymore, having been an editor of them. But I am a romantic, so I guess there's any historical fiction, and also some of the things that are out there now are like Outlander is basically a romance novel. But yeah. I guess mine would be any historical fiction, like, Pride and Prejudice, something like that.
I love that. That's really cool. So let's talk about a little bit more about thought leadership. You have been in the space for a while. You know thought leadership. You know why it's important for brands, for companies, for tech companies. But before we do that, let's get a very baseline understanding of like what thought leadership is. So if you could just define thought leadership, I think that'll give us a good understanding about what the topic is that we'll talk about.
Absolutely. It's a great question. And I think there is some ambiguity about it because it is different from just regular marketing. And the goal of thought leadership, especially for tech companies, is to help tech companies articulate the problem that the business problem that their technology solves. And a lot of times what you see is tech companies, and that includes tech companies like Google or Microsoft, or larger companies like Accenture and those kind of tech services company. They tend to focus on features and functions or the coolness of the brand, but they don't really explain the business benefits of of the problem that they solve.
Yeah, I feel like it's super important, but to be able to talk about what you actually solve is super important. And you talked about there are 3 types of thought leadership content. Can you kind of explain what those 3 different pieces of content are for thought leadership?
Yes, absolutely. I did just want to add one other point about the thought leadership piece. A thought leadership is, for tech companies, a lot of tech companies are really comfortable speaking the language of technology, and they think they're talking to other technologists, but really they're talking to other decision makers like CEOs, CFOs, CMOs even. So that's always a point to consider when you are doing thought leadership content. Yeah, there's 3 different types of thought leadership content. And the first one is my favorite, of course, because that's what I do for a living. And that's primary research. And it's basically, you conduct a survey, and the survey is sort of it's supporting a hypothesis. Usually that hypothesis is built on your company's business objectives or the value proposition of your company, because you want to find out more. It's actually really helpful to your own company to do these surveys because you get feedback from the marketplace. And usually, if you're doing it right, it's double blinded. So your respondents don't know who you are and you don't know who they are. So they give you, this unbiased data, which is gold in today's world. And so basically you do a you can do it yourself. You can have a partner who does this, or you can do it. And there's a lot of different ways to do this questionnaire. But anyway, you get the data back, and then you look at the data and you find out what's most interesting. How is it supported your points or not. And either way, it's good information for your company. And then you take the data, you tell the story, so you take the data and you find out the most provocative findings, and you basically tell the story, and you built basically the outline of your story with the hypothesis. But of course, there's a lot of nuances and whatnot that you get depending on the data that you find. So, and the second type of thought leadership is anecdotal. It's when you get your executives that have all this experience. Maybe they were technologists themselves, but they've worked with a lot of clients, a lot of enterprises. So they have a ton of knowledge that you can capture, whether it's a blog or whether it's in a panel discussion, or, just, talking to them one-on-one. And then there's the third type, which is basically third-party research. That includes information you can get on the internet from other analyst firms or research that you can scour and collect on the internet. But of course, that's less valuable. It's not your own primary research, but it can help build, support whatever it is you're trying to do.
I like that. So let's talk about these three a little bit more in depth. Is there one that you think is, if a marketing company, if someone young in their career comes into a company, is like, we need to do thought leadership, is there one that you would suggest people to start with if they are wanting to generate thought leadership?
Well, that's a really good question. You take Accenture, for example, they have a huge thought leadership function. And then you have these other companies that, maybe thought leadership is part of their content team. And they just do a white paper here and there that's using the third method that I mentioned, where they go out and they build a case using this available research. But it's really powerful when a company can do their own primary research, because one, it shows their commitment to thought leadership. And the value of thought leadership is that it positions the company to show that they're forward thinking. They're looking at trends in the marketplace. They're looking at how they can innovate. They're looking at tapping into things that no one else is looking at, as far as what should they as a company be doing. There's so many good benefits to it. And then the data, which you own, that can last you for a year or more. Just to have it for marketing purposes. You can use it in social media, for emails, for client engagements. So there's a lot you can do with the data that ends up giving you credibility, because you've cited your source, which is a study that is unbiased, and it gives you this data that you can mine for a long time. And then you could even go back later. Let's say you do, like right now at my company, we're doing a study on AI for business. Maybe we do one for next year, and we go back and look at what the data said this year compared to what it's saying next year. So you can keep using and see historical trends that is available nowhere else.
I really like that. I feel like data truly is king within marketing, because once you have data just on customers, insights you found, you could really chop that up into so many different pieces of content. If it's a video, if it's a white paper, if it's a blog, you can post on your website. It's a great lead generation asset as well. So I feel like the more data you have in marketing, the better as well.
Absolutely. And, they've done, there's different sales methods, for email campaigns and lead generation. A data point that you can cite, it's unfailingly it's more effective than any other type of just generic marketing, as far as lead generation. So it's a very powerful tool. You get your money's worth. Well, we don't have it set up like this right now at TCS, but my manager, he's the global head of the Thought Leadership Institute at TCS. His vision is that the organization should be agile and sort of scalable, and have a hub and spoke model that works really well with your other content creators and things like that. So there's a lot of ways to do it that a company can do thought leadership. model. There's big ones like Accenture, and there are these more agile models like the one I just described.
Yeah. And let's talk about like how like all this thought leadership really helps companies grow. Can you talk about how thought leadership marketing does help a company actually reach its revenue objectives, its pipeline objectives, its marketing objectives? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on it a little bit. First of all, it actually helps your executives, because when you have these conversations with them based on data, and they're coming to you with client experiences, large enterprise experience, it helps shape their narrative and basically how they sell, how they take, like, for example, at TCS, how they go and sell our, let's say, AI offerings. They will be more empowered because they can say what we've seen, in the study is XYZ. So it gives them a very solid dimension to when they're talking, to other companies. So that seems maybe like a little bit high level, but you want your executives to look like thought leaders and look like they're on the cutting edge, and that they're innovators, and that they're going to be able to guide you as a company where you want to go in the future, not just right now. So that's another, and then the data just sort of supports all of that. It's not them just saying, oh, you should do this. So there's that. And then we talked about the other ways, the marketing, the way you can use thought leadership basically as your anchor content. And you can slice and dice it and use it so many different ways for like over a year, so there's a lot that you can do with it. You can create white papers, reads, presentations.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not to mention infographics, all of that.
Yeah. I also want to ask, so thought leadership for like some people might be like, it's like, oh, like, as you talked about, like there is a ton of value here when it comes to thought leadership, but how should someone young in their career, if they want to prove that their thought leadership worked with like executives, what are some key metrics that like they should look for to like attribute thought leadership to this specific goal?
So marketing traditionally has challenges getting attribution for revenue generation, right? I mean, it's hard, like, especially if you're just talking about the awareness stage of marketing. Until you get down to the actual buy, it's often very hard to track when a lead becomes, it's converted.
Yeah, it's hard.
So I think that's a challenge for all of marketing. Of course, there are some AI tools that help. But right now, the way we do it is we know that our executives see that it's being used at events. It's being used, with panel discussions. It's being used in client pitches. So it's really, really a challenge to, outside of you put something on your website and it's downloaded, you can track that sort of thing. But there's a softer side to thought leadership that is hard to track and prove. And yet, it's invaluable when you're talking to clients. And I think it becomes clear to senior leadership that it's invaluable. But yeah, it's a little bit challenging to attribute it to revenue directly.
Yeah, I feel like that, like you said, though, with a lot of marketing initiatives, attribution is like one of the hardest things to actually do. And like we're having conversations about attribution right now, actually, at my company. Right. How do you actually know what is driving revenue for your company? It's such an important question to answer, but it is so hard to be able to actually answer that.
And you know what? Another thing is a lot of times you have challenges with sales and marketing, because sales can on occasion not think that marketing is exactly they shouldn't get attribution, because maybe marketing is not talking exactly to their specific client, and they don't always want to give you attribution if you're in marketing. And so working together with sales and marketing, that takes a really effective CMO to get that happening. And it's also really hard at these larger companies, because you have so many diverse MarTech stack. So it's hard to get all of your data in one place. And that's, and there are AI tools, but to get it across the client journey is really, really challenging.
Yeah. I think what you just spoke about too is like you need a CMO that's basically like a chief revenue officer where they combine marketing and sales, because like so often you're going to experience like sales and marketing like going like butting heads of like, exactly. Oh, like we did this. It happens all the time.
Yeah, exactly. That you're exactly right. And I think the way to bring it together is have joint KPIs, like we're all in this together. And I do think, for example, I think it's really great when a marketing person, even thought leadership person, is allowed to just listen in on client conversations. And it becomes more real. It becomes very real to the marketing person, what the salesperson, the challenges they're dealing with. So, I think there's a lot of ways to do that. And I think you've got to make it a really tight team feeling. It's not sales versus marketing. It's let's reach our goals together.
Yeah, exactly. And once you do find a team that they really want to reach those goals together, it all comes down to KPIs, like you said, of like identifying the KPIs that are going to drive the company forward and making sure marketing's doing what they can for that and sales is doing what like they can do for that, and like working hand in hand. I feel like that is so important.
Working hands in hand, so important. And also, everybody has to give to get. You're not going to get everything either side. So there's got to be like this compromise, and a good CRO or CMO, definitely is able to help with that. Start from the awesome. Top down, Brian.
It is starting from the top down. And if you're young in your career, interviewing with companies, probably even smaller companies, you want to definitely ask about where's that sales and marketing alignment? How are they aligned? And like actually vet that out, because it'll make your life a lot more challenging or easier depending on how much they work together. I want to ask a question. I think it is a very interesting question. So we've been talking a lot about data, get data, turn that into white papers, blogs, etc., guides, ebooks, all that good stuff. But how do you actually transform that data into a storytelling method that is engaging and people actually want to read?
Oh, yes. That's a good one. So I'm not a big Excel fan, but I've become one since I've been doing thought leadership research. So we get the data from our survey, and it goes into basically an Excel. And then we have a data analyst who takes it and puts it into basically a pie chart that's easily visible. So let's say you have 10 questions, and you get 10 PowerPoints. Now, if you do a big survey or a big study, you can have it by industry, by geography, by role. So there's a lot of infinite ways to look at the data, and then you can compare questions. Well, if they answered this way, what about when they answered that way? So there's a lot of ways to cut it, but let's just say we look at the 10 answers to the 10 questions. You can now, hopefully you've done your research before you even build out the survey. So you have an idea of what's happening in the market. Like, let's say you're talking about AI for business, which is what our study is talking about. We suspected that a lot of companies were struggling with their strategy. We wanted to know, where are they now? What do they think about AI right now? What are they worried about it in the future? So you build the story based on what you kind of already know. But some findings, they're just not that interesting. So you want to tell the story like you would to a normal person. Like, I'm not going to start talking to you, Ryan, and go, hey, did you know that like 50% of AI implementations are not successful? Or, I'm going to make you care about it. Like any human being, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and at the end, a lot of times, it's helpful for our company, although we do analysis, we're going to weave in our recommendations, our best practices, what we've seen, just as a contrast. Now, sometimes it differs from what the data said. So that can be a very provocative thing some of our executives aren't always comfortable with it. They're like, well, that's not what we see. But what we advise them, and we have these conversations, we say, but you can say, well, we have a case study here. It shows, our approach was successful, so we can show thought leadership that way, even when we're going, counterintuitively against the data. And then you take these, the storyline, and you build a narrative. You could build a brief. You use an infographic. Maybe with the infographic, you only talk about, where people are currently with AI. And then maybe you talk about the challenges, but you slice and dice it, so that it's chunkable and easily consumable. And then you send it back to the full report, which has all of the juicy details,
Yeah. I love that. I feel like collecting data is one thing, but being able to actually convey that effectively in a storytelling method is the actual hard part to do that. Anyone can pull, not anyone can do this, but you can get 5,000 survey respondents and give you a ton of data. But if you're not able to talk about that in some sort of storytelling method, I feel like it kind of goes on the wayside, where people just don't pay attention to it too much.
Well, I was going to tell you that, it's so easy when you're in it, because everything starts being interesting. To me, I'll be looking at some little detail, and then I have to step back and go, what is you always have to be thinking of your audience. How much time do they have? We all are being bombarded with so much information. So you have to really be thinking what are they going to care about the most, and what's the most exciting thing. So that is really, really hard to have empathy and also knowledge of who you're talking to, in every format. So that kind of helps too. But you have to step back also and go, I'm a human being. What do I want to know? And what is the flow that makes sense to me? You don't want to get up and just start spewing data, like you said. So it is a challenge, and that's where the creative side of it comes in, and also the curiosity and empathy that a good, thought leadership content marketer will have.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of good insights when it comes to thought leadership here, and we are kind of winding down. But what should someone that's young in their career, you've given a ton of great advice, but if they actually want to get into thought leadership, like marketing in general, what's a tip that you would give them?
I would follow companies that are doing it right. Thought leadership can work for any size company. You could do it for a startup. You could do it for a mid-level company, and also for these larger companies. I think that starting with basic marketing principles is good. And I think you build up from there, because you continually get deeper into, maybe you start off, you're writing emails, and then your next step might be to do some kind of, we'll just call it a brochure. Then the next thing might be a white paper. And then you just sort of evolve. But you have to make it known what you want, and what you reach out and say is, I'm curious, I'm smart, I appreciate the value of data, I appreciate the value of storytelling. And then I think, we were talking about this earlier, Ryan, connect with people on LinkedIn that can help you and mentor you and introduce you to people. A lot of it is just saying, I see the value of thought leadership, I want to be part of it. So a lot of ways you can get into thought leadership is read about it. There's a lot of good books out there. One is by my mentor, Bob Boudet, who writes about how thought leadership can be profitable for tech companies. And he has a book, not super expensive, on Amazon. He's really, really amazing. He goes into a lot deeper dive about all of these things. But just off the top of my head, I'd say connect with people that are involved in thought leadership on LinkedIn.
I love that. Well, Suzanne, thank you so much for today. Last question for you. Where can people learn more about you and connect with you?
Well, I appreciate that. I would love for anyone that's interested in learning more about thought leadership to reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Suzanne Hayes Rose, Hayes, and Rose like the flower. So I'd love to help anybody out who wants any tips, and I'm happy to jump on a call or connect you with people if I can. So that would be phenomenal. I really appreciate your time today, Ryan, and all the great work you're doing to help people get started in technology. It's a lot of fun, and it's fast paced, and it really is exciting.
I love it. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for being here today. Great conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.